Hi, this is Congressman Tom Cole. This is another one of our weekly chats, actually the first one of 2022, to talk about what's happening in Congress. Let me talk first about what I think is really important national news and a consequence of what's happened in Congress, and that's the record inflation rate that was announced this week, 7% year over year inflation, the fastest, highest inflation in 40 years. And this is something that a lot of us predicted when the Democrats took the House and the Senate and the presidency and started spending like drunken sailors. Although the difference is drunken sailors, of course, spend their own money. In this case, Congress has been spending the money of the American people at a really reckless rate. And it's not just Republicans that say that. When the original coronavirus relief bill, which was wildly excessive, had a lot of things that had nothing to do with the virus, was passed, Larry Summers, who's the former Secretary of the Treasury for Bill Clinton, a very noted economist, former president of Harvard, warned Democrats that this was too much, that too much money was being injected in the economy. It would lead to inflation. He was laughed off. That's back in the period where the Federal Reserve said all this was transitory. They now are telling us, well, maybe not so transitory. We need to raise interest rates and dramatically scale back what we've been doing. So I think that shook up Washington pretty good, and it'll be something we deal with for months and months to come, because every American feels it. Inflation is essentially a tax on everybody, and the people least able to pay it are the people that suffer the most. That is, people that are living close to the line or at the poverty line or below it. You increase what it costs to put food on their family tables, or to get to work in their vehicle, or to put clothes on their back. You make a real difference for the worse in their lives, and that's exactly what Democratic policy has done, and there's been a lot of discussion about that. That will continue. I would say that probably the second big item has been the failure of Democrats to actually do their job. That is, they are the majority party in both houses, and they have the presidency. We still don't have a year-long spending agreement. We're still lurching from continuing resolution to continuing resolution. Actually participated in a hearing on Wednesday of this week on the Defense Appropriations Subcommittee, where we had the service chiefs telling us how damaging the inability to come to an agreement was. Now, Congress has actually authorized spending at much higher levels, but it's not yet passed the appropriations bills. And that's because there are splits in the Democratic Party over these things. One wing wants to spend less than the president. Most of them want to spend about as much as the president. Republicans think, and some Democrats, that you ought to be spending more, that it's a pretty dangerous world. So what we haven't had is much agreement. The leadership in the House and the Senate, particularly the Democratic leadership, have been trying to do other things. Their focus was first the coronavirus relief bill and the infrastructure bill, and to their, whether you agree with them or not, and I did not, they passed both those. But in recent months, it's been the so-called Build Back Better bill, a monstrosity of a bill that passed the House but has been unable to pass the Senate. They can't even get 50 Democrats for it. No Republican supported it in the House. No Republican will support it in the Senate. And yet we've had the President of the United States and the Democratic Majority Leader in the Senate, Chuck Schumer, waste months talking to Senator Manchin, who's been honestly blindingly clear on this since the summer, what he didn't like about it. But we've wasted a lot of time, and that's failed. Now you see the Democrats engaged in an effort to, claim that somehow they need to federalize elections all across the country in order to protect people's right to vote. That's nonsense. People voted in overwhelming numbers in 2020. It's the highest turnout we'd had in 120 years. I think we'll have probably record off-year turnout again. But it's not hard to vote in the United States of America. And to suggest otherwise, honestly, I think is to be disingenuous. Democrats last year passed two horrific bills, opposed not just by Republican members, but by a lot of Democratic secretaries of state or nonpartisan election officials. Our own Secretary of the state election board sent every member from Oklahoma a letter as to why the Democratic proposals would cost more money and make our elections less secure and lower public confidence in the results, and said, please don't change it. Things work very well in Oklahoma. We prefer to run our own system. And every member of our delegation has voted accordingly. We have high confidence in our elections. So, but again, this is about tilting power. Democrats want to be able to have same-day registration, want you to be able to vote literally days after the election, want people to be able to harvest ballots, want money going directly to politicians in a convoluted match system where they can take federal money for their campaigns. I mean, it's just an outrageous legislation. It passed the House without Republican support, couldn't move in the Senate. This week, the Democrats have engaged in sort of a legislative Hail Mary. They've found a way that you can actually get this bill to the floor in the Senate. That is, you take a perfectly innocent bill with bipartisan support, in this case, the reauthorization of funding for NASA, our space effort, and you take all that language out and you stick in your voting rights legislation, pass that, and it goes over to the Senate, and you can't use the filibuster to block consideration. Now, at the end of the day, you still have to get 60 votes to end the debate, which the Democrats will not get, but you can actually discuss it. And this is a way to bring more pressure on people like Senator Manchin from West Virginia and Senator Sinema from Arizona to try and make them reform the filibuster so controversial legislation can pass on a narrow partisan vote. I don't think that is likely to happen, but that's what's going on. Now, as Democrats, and particularly the president, focus on things like Build Back Better, which has failed, thank goodness, or changing the filibuster, which looks unlikely to succeed, or this really atrocious effort to federalize all the elections and center all the power in Washington, D.C. What they haven't done is the basic work of government. Again, we need a budget agreement. We need to fund our military. We need to fund the basic agencies of government. But we're going to spend the next several days in Washington, particularly in the United States Senate, tied up in knots over voting legislation that has very, very little chance of passage. For that, I'm grateful, but for the waste of time and energy, I'm not. Again, we have an administration and a Democratic leadership, in my view, that just chases one bright and shiny object after another, as opposed to just do the basic business of government. And as a consequence, we're ending the first year of the Biden administration, I think, in some disarray. And I would just ask you to consider this, because January 20th is the first year anniversary of the Biden administration. We have more coronavirus cases than we had then. Now, to some degree, that's not their fault. We can't control the virus, but the reality is we don't have the tests we need, even though the Biden administration was warned that was coming and has billions of dollars voted for, and we don't have all the therapeutics available to people to help them when they get sick. Again, we have the science, we have the products, we just haven't bought and stored these things in sufficient numbers. So, when the president declared, as he did in July of 2021, we're independent from the virus, he was premature, and they took their eye off the ball. So things are worse there. We have this unprecedented inflation, worst in 40 years. They have to take responsibility for that. We have Russian troops massing on the Ukrainian border and the Chinese being aggressive in the East and South China Sea. That's a direct result of the debacle in Afghanistan, where the United States pulled out and literally handed over a country of 38 million people to the very same folks that had hosted Osama bin Laden while he was plotting to attack the United States. Finally, we have disruptions in our supply chains that are creating enormous problems in our economy. We still have fewer Americans at work than we had in February of 2020, and it's very difficult to get them back to work. So I look at the Biden administration, I see us endangered abroad, I see us weaker economically, I see inflation ravaging things. And finally, and one I did not mention but should have, I see a porous southern border where drugs and human trafficking are out of control and where millions of people are coming into our country illegally. That problem didn't exist until Joe Biden changed all the policies. So, again, I would say we're in for a rocky time. Hopefully, along the way, we can come to some agreements and get some things done. But again, it's been a volatile and tumultuous opening week for Congress and certainly for the Biden administration. But we'll see what happens. I look forward to chatting with you again next week.